Please welcome Michael Colon and the panelists to discuss Powering Progress, what's needed for a resilient and dynamic energy future.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'd like to introduce this panel that has expanded, starting with my immediate left, Colin Yost, Commissioner of the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. Next is Caroline Carl. She's the Executive Director of Hawaii Energy. And then Mark Glick, the Chief Energy Officer of the Hawaii State Energy Office and bodyguard to the governor. And then Governor Josh Green. So thank you guys so much. And, just as, we've been listening to all morning, we're kind of at an inflection point. This very challenging last 9 or so months. And it's causing a lot of reflection on where we're going to go next. This next decade in the energy space was critical already, and this additional challenge is adding to some of the context and challenges, but also some opportunities. So it's important that we're cognizant of how we go about and be intentional in how we proceed. And so with that in mind, kind of in the spirit of that, that's kind of what wanted to formulate this panel discussion about. And so kind of would love to just jump right in. This is a question for everybody, is, considering Hawaii's aging energy infrastructure, where do we go? What kind of technologies and innovations should we be prioritizing for the next 5 to 10 years to enhance both resiliency, but at the same time, affordability? So if, we want to lead off with Colin.
Thank you, Michael. Well, as Governor already previewed, first I need to say, though, that I am not speaking on behalf of the entire Public Utilities Commission. I'm one of 3 commissioners, and so the views I'm expressing today are things that I believe in and care about and will advocate for, but I have to persuade my fellow commissioners if I want to move things in certain directions. And we have been a very collegial group so far. We haven't had a single dissent or even concurrence filed in any of the orders in the last 17 months, but you can never presume that will happen forever given the magnitude and complexity of the issues that we're facing. So, but Governor, as Governor said, something that's become very interesting to me is, notwithstanding the incredible challenges that our primary utility, HECO, is facing, I think that keeping a firm sense of what is important in the future close at hand in everything we do and what we plan to accomplish is really important, no matter what we may be facing from an access to capital point of view or from a resource point of view. We should still try to focus on the right answer and see if we can get there through a different, perhaps more creative path. So this idea of 60-40 by 2030 is something that I'm exploring. I don't know fully how realistic it is, honestly, for the island of Oahu. I know that for Maui, for the big island of Hawaii, that should be eminently achievable, that you would be able to get to 60% variable renewable plus supported battery storage, and then 40% some kind of firm power mixture of whatever exists right now and new firm power sources that are already in the works in the RFP3 and then in the IGP RFP process that's shortly going to come. So I think even for Oahu, this should be something that is possible. And the reason that I fixate on this sort of simplistic ratio is that on Kauai, you've already seen it demonstrated that they got there and they made an enormous dent in the volatility problem associated with oil prices, right? So their rates are now, as they demonstrated through their slide, the lowest in the state, which is extraordinary for this very small island and only around 70,000 ratepayers. It's extraordinary that they've achieved that. And if they can achieve it, I think the rest of the state should be able to do it too. And the main reason we experienced such crazy electric bill fluctuations in the past couple of years was because of this oil volatility problem. The things we can't control geopolitically, affected, the prices that we pay every day at the fuel pump and on our electricity bills on Oahu and Maui and Big Island. So I think we can make progress there. We can take existing technologies and implement them faster. We can commit still to getting something like the crazy 5-year development timeline for new projects. We should focus on still trying to get that down to 3 years, separate and apart from all the other challenges we face. Like, if we do these things, we will create a more reliable, effective electricity system, and it will also be more affordable.
Thank you. Caroline, from a demand side
Absolutely.
perspective.
It's my pleasure and wonderful to be here. And thank you so much, Governor, for giving us some more of your time today. When we think about adequacy of resources, I think from a Hawaii Energy perspective and our work directly with the State Energy Office and the PUC, I'm thinking about demand for this generation. And what does demand really mean? That means all of us in our homes and in our buildings doing what we need to do every day and being able to do so agilely, flexibly, comfortably. And if we're thinking 60-40 in the next 6 years by 2030 or any of these goals, what we really, I see as absolutely critical is needing to double down on the technology access to our community members, to families in their homes. And this is going beyond just upgrading our water heaters. This is smart controls with every single water heater that's going in. This is looking at air conditioning, which we know is going to increase. Everyone is needing more cooling in their house, and that's a right. So how are we keeping these things smarter? What are we doing with our incentive programs to ensure that it's easy and accessible and influencing supply chain before things get off a boat here? So the generation side is something that is in our heads at Hawaii Energy every single day, but really what we're focusing on too is representing how our households can be part of that equation and be compensated, or at least have structures that they're able to move within the system to be prosumers every day.
Thank you. Okay, Mark. And going back to the generation side, what, in your opinion, are Hawaii's needs for firm power generation capacity? And more broadly, where does Hawaii stand on adequacy of resources?
Yeah, great question. We heard this morning, and I thought it was a really great panel with Eric Wright and John Maurer, basically talking about our fuel system as it stands today and looking into the future. When we think of adequacy of supply, we're really concerned about the aging power plants, most which are over 50 years old. 11 out of 12 of the steam generation units are that old, and they won't survive for much longer. So we have to deal with that. You've all been experiencing that, been experiencing in Maui, been experiencing on Hawaii Island, on Oahu for certain. And so we're dedicated to try to find an investment capital to be able to do that. I also was very excited that we were able to win a key grant, the Hawaiian Electric secured through the GRIP program, $95 million. We have applied for $250 million more for a $500 million program with matching funds with KIUC and Hawaiian Electric to upgrade grid infrastructure and to harden poles and to look at some strategic undergrounding and all those key things that are necessary. So we've got to upgrade power plants. We've, in some cases, replace them. We know that we need, if you look at the adequacy of supply reports, which I'm sure you all pore over, I look at those really carefully, and it says that we need on Oahu 33% energy reserve margins. What that means is that you got to have that much above and beyond your load to be able to run safely and reliably. And we're not really there right now. So we need to enhance that and get that moving. So those are some of the things, and of course you have to do what the governor has directed us to do. Do that by lowering carbon, do that by lowering prices, and put some downward pressure on that. And we have to try to find ways to get capital either through grants or through other things, investments or smart strategies like the securitization that the governor mentioned with funds and so on. There are things we can do, but we have to take it on in a kind of a whole new, out-of-the-box thinking way.
Thank you. And yeah, just to touch a little bit more on that, did you want to expand on kind of the current challenges, both Mark, Governor, with Hawaiian Electric and that limited access to capital and what it means right now?
Sure, I can. A whole lot of confidential proprietary stuff going through my brain, okay? First of all, let me say thank you. Many of you are texting me right now. I can feel it buzzing, so I will be replying to you soon. It will be me, okay? So thank you for that. I'm not kidding, unless my mother is going through something. HECO can survive if it has support from the community, and it's very tough in the moment because the tragedy has occurred, and tragedies do occur, and we have to go through this process together. What other cliches can I tell you before I try to say something real? I spent last week in Los Angeles with probably about 80% of the global wealth at a conference called the Milken Conference, and all of those parties, of which they all are running multi-billion-dollar funds, are looking right now in the climate space to find a way to invest and get return on investment, because there's a significant delta there. Soon we will move past the era of expensive and volatile fossil fuels, as Mark shared, and into an era where it's good for governments with subsidies, it's good for peoples to move away from the fuel that's destroying our planet. And so there's an appetite for that. There's an appetite to invest billions of dollars in HECO if we go past the threshold of resolving this crisis. You know, we have to make people whole and help them through their losses, and that's real. That's a $3 to $5 billion question at least. And I only reduce it to money because of the question. Really, we have to help several thousand people get back on their feet and decide that we trust the process, which is we have many partners. HECO's one big one. HEI, there's so many partners in the room right now. We have enough work to go around if we're going to get to renewables, and I think there's more than enough money to do it too. But there might not be enough political will to do it, because if we just do the standard play, which is run out the clock on fossil fuels at the liquid fuel level, and if we try to find a niche, and I do love solar, by the way, and wind, but if we try to find that niche in a market that's more expensive to build it, away from the mainland, we may not get there. We might languish for a long time, and either the power plants will break down, or we'll continue to burn carbon at an alarming rate. And so in the coming months, I've humbly asked Mark and the team, and they have a tough job because I press. I just say, look, guys, please do a full analysis on each of the energy sources and tell me what road, like Mark said, decreases the amount of carbon that we consume and decreases cost in a bridge to full renewables by 2045 or even sooner. And can I just be blunt? One of those ways is liquid natural gas, and that gives a lot of people hives. I get it. I do. But if the goal is to use less carbon and get there sooner so that we are actually renewable, we have to have everything on the table. If it could be done today with capital investment that I could bring in with full renewables and no impact and get through this time, of course we would do that. Of course. But I'm going to ask the hard questions about what's actually possible, and then we're going to put it to you. Then a lot of people are going to yell, and then we're going to embrace like we do, and we're going to eat malasadas, and then we're going to figure out what we actually can do. And what we actually can do is important, because one thing I really have learned as governor is if we wait too long, it has a cost. It has a human cost in our state. And that human cost is losing our local families to the mainland, because it doesn't pencil out for a lot of families with very high energy bills, very high housing bills, and very high food bills. It just doesn't pencil out. So this is one thing that I'm passionate about, And I would ask you to not just do the back of the napkin exercises with the multiple power sources, but come and we will take this on the road. Mark and the PUC will have to ultimately make this decision. I do not meddle with them, but you will have to give input, and please speak up. I don't want it to simply be the loudest voices that have some kind of bias. I want it to be all the voices for our people, and I think we can get there. And I think you'd be surprised at how much money is going to come into the state to do it if we're bold.
Thank you. Kind of building on what you just were talking about in terms of political will, there's a transition afoot, at least locally and hopefully nationally, to have more community engagement in energy planning. Shout out to the team in Molokai who has done significant, tremendous work and leading towards self-determination and their energy plan. And, we support that. I think that's a path for increased success and viability for projects and engagement moving forward. But, every new opportunity, there's some challenges and new things that need to be ironed out. And so I guess in that context, and this is for Mark or Governor, in that context of community energy planning, what mechanisms should be in place to ensure that underprivileged or vulnerable communities have a significant voice and influence in decision-making processes and increase acceptance of those projects or, planning in general?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think one of the great things that has happened with power purchase agreements, one of the recent developments has been having binding community benefit plans as part of that. And we've seen people step up. There's sort of a base guideline for what that investment is, and I've seen some of the parties double or triple that as they go into the communities, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Having honest discussions, we found that in some of the community benefit packages that are now being talked about for stage 3, people are thinking about wildfire mitigation efforts and about how do you deal with grasses, and maybe you bring in cattle or sheep, to help abate that. So those are some of the new things that are going on. It's fun to see, really inspiring to see the communities saying, well, we want to be part of the solution. This is what's important to us, and it protects our homes and all of that. So I think that's one step. The other thing is something, and I know I saw her here, Leilani Chow from Molokai. The truth of the matter is that community-driven planning is changing the game as well. And I have to give credit to the Public Utilities Commission for allowing that to happen and basically asking Hawaiian Electric, with their support, to take a pause on their generation plans for Molokai to wait and see what the community comes up with under their Community Energy Resilience Action Plan. And it's now going to the second phase. That's a really great model. It's a model in the sense that you might not have to duplicate that. You might not be able to do that island-wide everywhere, but we might be able to take pieces of that and apply it to community resilience hubs and that sort of thing, moving forward on places like Oahu that are more populated and more complex. So things like that we are deeply involved in, and it's exciting to see. And the bottom line is people are asking for resilience, and they're asking to accelerate the energy transition so they can be more like Kauai and insulate themselves from oil price volatility. And I'm so grateful that the governor has committed to maintain and accelerate our transition, and hearing the Public Utilities Commission is there as well. We're so lucky to have that alignment in policy, and I know that everyone here also agrees with that and supports that. So it's a very exciting thing.
One of the things that I think about is at times diametrically opposed challenge with community engagement is the amount of time it takes. To be able to move at the speed of trust is an important, goal for everyone who's working in this space. To be able to raise the level of discourse and engage truly with community so that they have the kind of feedback that's necessary to have them engaged takes longer. And that's a challenge when we're trying to move quickly to achieve our energy goals. And so, Colin, with Molokai's community doing as a successful example of this, what what are the challenges moving at the speed of trust to do a true community-driven energy development plan?
Molokai has, given the rest of us a gift of demonstrating, from start to at least close, heading towards the finish of a real plan that makes sense for their community. As Mark just said, we can't duplicate that precise process for every community, but I think that what we need to do is get away from a problem I think still exists, notwithstanding the improvements we've made in the RFP process and the ongoing work that's going on in the PUC's equity docket, that we are still kind of in a position where communities are sort of in a reactive mode. Like, they are presented with a proposed plan for the most part, and they're asked to react to it and decide how can this be made acceptable to us or more meaningful? How can there be a nexus between the goals of the development, the energy project itself, and the needs of the community? And that is not really fully codified in the RFP process yet. It should be. There should be a better way for us to create that nexus, to promote that nexus between the community's needs and the needs of our entire energy system. So I think it's still a work in progress, and I think I'd love to see more come out of the equity docket that is concrete, that we can implement, that will put communities in a better position to come to the commission or come to the utility with their own ideas, with their own plans in a proactive way. And for us, if we can create incentives for communities to do that, then I think we can dramatically improve what will ultimately wind up happening with these community benefit plans and with the projects that we continue to make our future possible.
Thanks. Governor, you have?
Sure. So, it is difficult. As I have a kind of a special affection for Molokai, just from travels with family there. And so having been with people, and it's just a very real community, it's great because it's like a small number of people, 7,000 or 8,000 people, right? We do have the benefit of what should happen with our government, which is we have 51 representatives, we've got 25 senators, and we've got variable numbers of council members. They could run in parallel this discussion, have this dialogue about what they really want in the largest areas, and I mentioned them earlier. Really, it's housing, affordability, and energy. Some people also feel strongly about ag and sustainable agriculture. So each one of us might have an additional top topic to put in there. But if they engage, and if you encourage them to engage, to have those open public meetings, we could do it in tandem. No executive branch member could do it because we just don't have enough bodies to do it. We rely in a good democracy on hearing from the legislators through their large communities and then having that opportunity. Also, we do have some technology advantages now. Everyone got used to sitting in their underwear in Zoom meetings, talking with all their colleagues for 2 years, right? And we could have this statewide dialogue, and we're contemplating that. What's important to me is that we set one of the things aside, which was raging binary debates, that it's either A or B. And if we can't agree, we'll go to war, and then we do what we do, which is nothing, right, for a long time. That we can't do, or I am very, very reluctant to see happen. I would much rather fight it out. And like what I did in that conversation, just as before we came to the panel, is I tried to find a common ground with all of us, which is to say we want to come off of oil, right? Once we come off of pure fossil fuels, we should consider that a victory for all of us. At that moment, all of the communities have basically won. So, okay, now we have in that safe space, which community is going to embrace solar, which is going to embrace LNG, which is going to embrace geothermal, and how much? Because we've already come to a consensus on the victory. Now, it might still be tough. Some of the stuff is still controversial. I get it. And maybe we shouldn't do it. But I will say, once we've already established victory on the largest question, which I would argue we did, which is to say we're going to be fully renewable, and we're going to put most of our investment towards fully renewable futures, now just agree to work through the hard nitty-gritty of each stage and have that conversation so that you know where the legislators know where each community is, then in the end it is a democracy. We can actually act that way. We have an opportunity, as you can see, we can get together pretty close. And I hope that that's what we do, and we then filter it to basically these guys. You know, there's not a more influential group than PUC leaders and the Energy Office for these decisions.
Thank you. Caroline, as somebody who works direct to consumer in some of the space, you know, what's coming up from a community engagement standpoint for you?
Well, there's a lot. I think when everyone was speaking, one of the things that I value so much about the work we do and in the role of Hawaii Energy and just across the different agencies, we have the absolute honor to touch everything from policy all the way down to installing light bulbs. Like that is how, you know, in a small business, which brings with it a tremendous amount of perspective. But what I would highlight, as I think at least, Colin, to your point, if we're not there yet, there are a lot of conduits already in place to what you discussed around bringing, you know, what are the core values? What are we really trying to accomplish to get off oil, to feel comfortable, to feel that our homes our electricity bills are affordable? What is it that we're holding on to so the other stuff can fall away? There's the group, the Wayfinders that have been working very closely across the entire state. There's the precursor to the equity docket is the Energy Equity Hui, which has brought together over 200 different stakeholders in various different capacities, field trips, things like that. And these things didn't come out of a specific direction, but rather a recognition amongst multiple agencies that we're not doing it right yet. We're trying for sure, but when we're talking to renters and small businesses and folks that have no time in the best of circumstances, so let's layer on a ton of other very challenging situations. We can't bring a docket to them. Like, that doesn't work. So what we need to do, and what we've been trying to do, is figure out the mechanisms that are utilizing local labor, input from contractors that are doing the work, and hearing very loudly often, like, that's never gonna work. So then we go back to the drawing board and we have the next discussion. So I do want to highlight that as not the final solution, but I do think we have the conduits, and what we need to do, and what I see a responsibility of those of us up here and in this room, is those direct questions that need to come back to our legislators and to our executive branch and say, this is what we've aggregated as the feedback, and this is what we're working with now. It may not be the right answer perfectly, but it is the sentiment of what we've been able to gather through the channels that we have put in place.
Yeah, and I mean, at a broader sense too, deeper community engagement kind of implicates back the role of government. I always say when a commission issues an order, that what they do is they find something in the public interest. If communities are saying something, they're expressing the public interest. And so what then becomes the role of the regulator in that space? And so, it may take a reconsidering of certain aspects of how we engage in the space going forward. But lots of movement in that space. Caroline, I want to stick with you. This is a slightly different question, more about kind of building on changing dynamics, energy space in general, and the growth on the demand side for energy load. There's a significant projection of load increase in the next decade from EVs, as you mentioned before, increased use of air conditioning, and just general electrification. So in your perspective, what more can energy efficiency do to reduce the burden of this growth in our infrastructure, and also where are we failing on EE? Kind of what important efficiency measures should we be doing much more of?
Yeah, so I think to just put in context, we have had, because of the original Clean Energy Initiative and the Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, which doesn't get talked about as much anymore unless you live in my head, which it's talked about a lot. But we've had tremendous success in Hawaii with conservation and efficiency, and then also with distributed energy resources. Tremendous, like across, comparatively across the country. What is a little hard to kind of wrap our heads around sometimes, especially as it relates to homes and residents, we're pretty lucky when it comes to load in a residential sector. Our rates are very high and bills are very high, but in terms of actual consumption, we have largely beautiful weather and comfortable temperatures, and so what uses electricity in a house or in an apartment is a lot more limited, and so when we think across what else, where are we missing, what needs to be done, I don't see a lot of crazy new tech, which is, all the smart stuff is coming and is very critical for communication. But I think we really need to recognize there's taking it back to the basics and ensuring that we're going as deep as possible in the things that use the most electricity in our homes. So we're talking about a lot of potential in water heaters, but not just our single-family home water heaters. This is the small water heaters in multifamily housing, like in under the stairs or under the cabinet, stuff that's harder to get to and to replace. There's a tremendous solar thermal, heat pump, water heating, all these things. Water heating, if you don't have electricity, if you don't have air conditioning, is probably your largest load. So those are things it's hard to do to change out all of those that equipment. And so we need to get a lot more serious, especially if we're going to meet the scenario 2 of the decarbonization study. Like the water heating is pretty much one of the only ways in the residential, in addition to a lot of the other plug load things. And then on the commercial side, I do feel like this is the area where we have seen, especially with my team, like we just have to go deeper and further and more comprehensive in our facilities. And the building stock uses generates 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Like there's a lot that we're missing because it's hard. It's hard to get products. It's hard to get things permitted. It's just a lot of trying to keep things alive for as long as possible. And the problem with doing that is that we're foregoing a tremendous amount of energy savings right now, that we just can't afford to do that in the wake of climate change. And so I think that really it's going to take a village of contractors and everyone to come together and say it's not just going to be one thing today, it's going to need to be everything. And the financing and mechanisms to help businesses be able to do that.
Absolutely. Governor?
There is an additional challenge on the horizon, and that's artificial intelligence. It's going to be a big energy suck, and it could get adopted so aggressively through our computers and our programs and our tablets and so on that we're going to have to be mindful about that. And we're isolated. There's already some discussion about hubs popping up across the country in places where they are willing to do things that are very, very aggressive with energy. Things that we're not willing to do, and we have to be mindful of that. So technology is changing things somewhat rapidly, so we should be ready to be pretty nimble on some of these decisions.
Very important to call out, Energy Office's decarbonization study. Number 1 recommendation right off the bat, energy efficiency, right? It's probably the easiest and cheapest and most straightforward thing to do. Probably not easy for you, but easy for us consumers. But and so it's a significant opportunity, and it makes sense. It makes a lot. Before you start bringing in more generation, let's see how much more efficient we can operate. Bring that demand down before we move forward. So, thank you, Mark. And also, Governor, as these energy policies evolve to address climate change, what specific policy changes are necessary to mitigate the impact of more frequent and severe and extreme weather events on energy systems in particular? So
taking a first stab at that issue, there's been a lot of discussion and Fortunately, our office, in our role as sort of the lead on energy under ESF 12, which is a national sort of emergency response mechanism with FEMA. We have looked at, we did an advanced assistance study for the island of Oahu, which we hope to replicate on Hawaii Island, Kauai, and Maui. They basically looked at all the hazards. And basically the significant investments that we need to make, what came out of that was a basic understanding of essentially all of these sort of mitigation efforts as well. But clearly some of the investments that I talked about earlier that are now going to be hopefully achieved by the utilities through federal grants and other support. Obviously we have to continue to work towards fundamental hardening of systems, wires and poles, the poles in particular, composite poles, extremely important, moving forward in steel poles as well. So we hope to see sort of an acceleration of that. You know, that's really a capital constraint issue. You know, you really can't do that wholesale. Under the notion of undergrounding utility infrastructure, there was a wonderful discussion earlier. I think Beth Morrow from KIUC talked about, they looked at it system-wide, $6 billion. I mean, their total capitalization for KIUC. You think about that. We asked that question, Hawaiian Electric did the analysis for all of Maui, $13 billion. So that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. So it's a strategic effort to identify, and of course, if you talk to the utility engineers and leadership, they underground most of the urban areas anyway. That's part of it. So rebuilding Lahaina, there will be undergrounding that will be typical and necessary. So it's coming up with really smarter ideas on when you're building new infrastructure that involves water and other things. Can you lessen the cost of that $6 million per mile because you're essentially doing multiple things? So I think those are all things that can be done. And again, we're looking and scrubbing for the resources to do that.
It can't just be like, okay, we're going to legalize marijuana and we have some cash and we're going to put poles underground. I mean, that was the historical kind of game that got played. People come up with these ideas, okay, we'll have gambling and then we'll have more money and we'll do this stuff. I mean, it really is going to require a decision. Do we want to have a long capital play? Because there probably is a margin where people will invest many billions of dollars. But that comes with trade-offs, right? Comes with power. I was going to use the word power, but control trade-offs. We're not talking about selling the companies. We're talking about, do we bring in new investment models that can actually put some of these resources into play? I will tell you, because of the fire, because of the national, in fact, global attention that we got, I am able to push proposals over to the DOE. And I did humbly ask them to begin the process of putting billions of dollars into our grid. Why? Because we do have a military presence. They are asking us to do a great deal of the work in the Pacific region. It is relevant. That, of course, is going to necessitate some kind of agreement with the military on their leases for a future that includes Hawaii as its, tip of the spear for the Indo-Pacific region. So these are the questions that are really happening, and I'm more than happy to take one of these roads, but it would be helpful if everyone weighed in, honestly. These are decisions that will affect our future generations out, and they're big questions. If we know what we want, which we seem to, which is decarbonize, have a secure system, and have affordable energy, if we know what we want, we're going to have to pick our poison, which is either going to be outside investment, some form of energy that is a bridge, or maybe some other new technology I'm not even aware of yet. There is no shortcut, is I guess what I'm saying. But this room has the capacity to drive the energy policy for the state. So really think hard about what road that should be. And then just we'll tell Mark to do it.
And, you know, to that point, the hard thinking and some of the challenges about how we anticipate the future state of Hawaii and what those impacts could be from an energy standpoint. There's a big price tag, not only on the, you know, mitigation but adaptation side. And so, Colin, how should the life cycle of energy projects be adjusted to accommodate anticipated impacts of climate change going forward? And do you have any examples from kind of current practices that could be scaled?
Yeah, there's actually been some discussion about, this is really boring, depreciation schedules, and whether or not they're always, if they're being too rotely applied, or whether they should be thought of differently and adjusted based on the type of asset that you're building and how long it will realistically last. How could we push it out a little further? I mean, some people are able to afford that new electric car because they get a 72-month a lease on it or a loan payment on it. So I think that's kind of a simplistic thing to do, to look at some of these assets that maybe we could just amortize over a much longer period and still know that they will be useful. I don't think, though, that we should assume that our centralized way of producing power generally will always be the way we produce power. I mean, we already know that we need to have some of our assets, at least on the island of Oahu, move away from the coastline. And we need to figure out a way to do that strategically and cost effectively. And at the same time, like, figure out a way to make the generation resources serve more of a resilience function in the communities that are the one way in, one way out communities, which I guess is around 60% of the communities in the state of Hawaii. So, if we can think about accomplishing more than one objective at the same time with the transformation changes that we're making, it will be more affordable, because as we accomplish those multiple objectives, there's more likely to be investment in them, more likely to be benefits arising from them that make the entire project more affordable to the community. So I guess those are two sort of basic ideas, kind of boring in a way, but could be very impactful.
All right, and as we kind of turn the corner to the back end of our discussion here, kind of changing subject a little bit into policy and regulation, and this would be for Mark and Governor and Colin as well, if you feel like jumping in. But what legislative measures are critical right now to accelerate the transition towards sustainable and resilient energy systems? And how should these measures address both technological and behavioral changes? And I know you touched on it briefly before, but if you want to touch on it again, appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. And my apologies there. I'm going to jump onto a high fuel consuming plane and go over to Oahu in a minute. But we probably have to pass some form of forward-looking securitization opportunity if we want to have enough resources internally to pay for all these things that we want and survive. And just to unpack that a little bit, because that was a lot of legislative speak, we allow ourselves to take rates and have modest increases, but ensure that they then bond out long-term, 20-year bonds, take out debt that returns much more energy-efficient, renewable systems to then repay us back, basically, and decrease energy costs. That's what securitization basically is. We can do it a lot of different ways. It could be for the energy companies. It could be for the state itself, based on resources we have. But we probably need that power if we're going to have the long play, which is spreading out some of this cost for the good of, transitions. I think we have to do that. It hasn't passed yet because it was a very tumultuous time. And, it was important that we not suggest we're playing favorites or anything. Playing favorites is for our communities. That's really what it's about. I think we're pretty close to having excellent energy plans that can really decrease our cost. It seems like that to me. We have enough people that really want to work in the area now that we have more than enough equity to come in if we do the securitization. And we're also going to have to, and I'll put a plug in for something I feel very passionately about, I think we're going to have to take seriously the concept of green fees and taxing or putting fees on people that are traveling great distances to Hawaii that we then use to, pick our favorite projects. And renewable energy, self-sustaining systems seem to be it. So I think we should do that. It has the added benefit of making people think twice before they take a high cost, high fuel, high carbon impact trip anywhere in the world. It will curb slightly the amount of travel, totally in a good way, and people will have more sustainable vacations. They'll come and stay longer. They will not, just come for 3 days or 4 days, which is very high impact on the planet. These are things that we should do, in my opinion. Again, it takes a little bit of political will to do it, but it would be, I think, a very good thing to do, because I think that people in general, as I spend a lot of time with thousands of people, they do want to contribute to global solutions. And if we explain it that way, that they're contributing to Hawaii's sustainability goals or our renewable energy goals, I think it's going to be an added benefit for how people embrace Hawaii. So I'm going to excuse myself, so thank you for letting me be here for an hour. I really appreciate it, and I really mean it. Please give us best ideas. We rely on them if we're going to move forward. Aloha.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor Green. We have about maybe 12 minutes left, so a few more questions we can wrap up quickly thereafter. Mark, did you want to have any additional comments on that policy front?
Well, I couldn't agree with the governor anymore on the securitization issue, and of course, I think it does make sense to have a green fee. But above and beyond that, I really support the efforts that were discussed this morning. I think we should maximize the amount of green biofuels and biodiesel. Pacific Biodiesel has done a phenomenal job of creating low carbon solutions, and the good news is that they've done that and it can be expanded, maybe tripled or quadrupled, but as Eric Wright and others pointed out, John Maurer, it's a small percentage of what we need to basically handle the entire sort of fuel mix that we need in just one of the three sectors: aviation, ground transportation, and electric generation. So the legislation that you would want to compound on that is, so there may be, again, some subsidy within a range to help support that effort. Above and beyond that, though, we need to really rethink and I believe expand the opportunities for geothermal. That's a local resource, firm energy, 24/7. It can be done responsibly, and it ought to be done places where the community would actually appreciate that and embrace it. Obviously not in Puna District, perhaps, but other places. So we should continue to look at that. The legislature actually passed $6 million for such resource assessment, and we want to see that expanded because we really need to know everywhere. There's potential in Maui, which could be the firm power section. So that would be kind of the technology the governor said wasn't sure what is out there. If that were available, that would be a game changer. And obviously additional appropriate geothermal on Hawaii Island, let's say on DHHL land, could very well accelerate that island to get to 100% sooner. So those are a couple key legislative things, and of course would like to actually see the legislature pass the solar app, Rocky Mold, and also the energy efficiency portfolio standard extension. Yep. Two no-brainers. I don't know why they didn't pass, but we need to make sure they pass next year.
Thank you. Colin?
Quick follow-up. Wildfire safety. That did not pass the legislature, even though it got right up to the finish line. And even though the PUC will be moving forward with working with HECO and KIUC on updated wildfire mitigation plans, like it's something that the legislature should participate in as well to make sure that the state has the right amount of focus on that and the correct amount of resources dedicated to that incredibly important task. At the PUC, we do not have a kind of dedicated safety division. We are looking at figuring out what we can do with the resources we have available to us now to improve and expand our oversight of and participation in making sure that our infrastructure is safe. So there are a couple of things we might be able to do, but they're not going to be at the scale likely that we need to ultimately accomplish if we want to be in a better position than we are today. And then two other quick things. We've been trying to get more attention, more focus on the benefits of the transition we're engaging in right now, flowing more directly to less advantaged communities, communities that don't have control of their rooftops and haven't been able to participate as directly in the benefits of distributed energy. So we proposed a state LIHEAP to go on top of what the federal low-income energy assistance program provides, which is very minimal really compared to the need. It's like 10% of the projected needs. So we wanted to at least double or triple that with a meaningful state program, and that's not a huge investment for the state, but it could have a significant impact on people's lives and affordability. And then the last thing would be electric vehicle infrastructure. We're woefully behind on figuring out a way to have that technology accessible to all parts of communities, especially ones that are commuting and doing the most driving. Someone was telling me a statistic, and it might have been you, Michael, about how like the people who use the most gas, what's the percentage? It's a very small percentage,
Yeah,
right?
there's what we call them super users, and we're going to be releasing a report on that in the coming months. And I can't recall off the top of my head the specific numbers, but it's a small amount of a subset of the population of our drivers use a significantly outsized percentage of the fossil fuels of gasoline. And so if we can target those folks in particular, we can make a dramatic reduction in fuel consumption for the state just by getting those folks to electrify. So be on the lookout. Ulupono will be releasing that in the coming months.
Great, thank you.
And Caroline, while we're kind of talking policy, would you help the audience kind of understand the role of building codes and how housing policy and energy efficiency and how important building codes are in terms of what gets built and what ultimately the impact to our communities are, and what are those conflicts that are perceived and how they can be resolved to promote affordability and sustainability.
We only have 7 minutes left, so we need to take that in a few pieces. But I think, we were talking about this a bit before. I think year over year, we'll see successes and then maybe some not as successful years in terms of driving the adoption of enhanced appliance standards and building energy codes. And I think just to take it back at the most fundamental level, I think what we see in terms of the opposition to enhancing building energy codes is a difference in opinion around first cost versus life cycle costs. At the end of the day, building energy codes, international, national, are here to drive the market to be more resilient, more efficient, and adopt best practices for our building infrastructure. There are absolutely circumstances with national building codes that they're not necessarily applicable to housing here in Hawaii, and there are mechanisms that we have in place to make amendments to what the tropical circumstances are. So those mechanisms, the State Energy Office and their role in the State Building Code Council is here in play. But yes, in some circumstances, enhancing codes, moving from what was deemed 2015 to what is deemed the code for 2021 does have some increased upfront costs because the technologies are better, they're more efficient, or there's building practices that require a bit more in terms of materials to ensure the infrastructure is operating as efficiently as possible in the day-to-day circumstances. So what that translates to is the renter or the person, the owner in that house having less monthly bills. It's, and there is debates around how big is the upfront cost and what is the difference, but I think the studies that the state have done have been very clear. Just more recently, going from 2015 to 2021, I think the net savings with all the increased costs is $325 a year, with over the lifetime $6,000 in energy savings. So we need the right people in the room to have the debates around certain aspects of the code. That's both the developers and those that are looking out for the interests of being a resident or a building operator. But we heavily advocate for advancing things, because if the market is doing it, then we don't have to pay for it to be done up front, and those dollars can go to other investments.
Very important. Thank you. Okay, well, we're getting close to our final question here. So with that, I would just like to go down the line and ask each of you to, the subject for our panel was how to create a more resilient and efficient future. So if you could pick the kind of top two things, if you were king or queen for the day, and what to implement to arrive at that, what would those two things be? So, Colin, if you want to start, paint the picture for us.
I guess just to emphasize what we've been talking about, that a lot of the solutions that create a more reliable grid, a more affordable grid, they do exist today. The challenge we've had is how quickly we've been able to implement those technologies and those changes. So I think that the greatest challenge, and if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to dramatically improve the time it takes to permit and develop and implement change, not just at the utility scale level, but at the residential and small commercial level as well. There's a mind-boggling number of smaller projects that get held up for years because they hit a snag of some kind that DPP hasn't been able to solve yet, or the permitting authorities on other islands haven't been able to solve yet. And we need to get past those type of barriers. That's the classic get out of your own way phenomenon. We also need to make sure that everyone who's got the ability to contribute to the solution is working towards that contribution. So more from government. If we're going to look at wheeling this coming year and in a new docket, and part of that's going to be looking at intragovernmental wheeling, whether or not we can accelerate and incentivize government to build more renewable generation on its own properties where it has control quickly, and get those to contribute to the overall resource mix. So we need everybody who's got the potential to contribute to be incentivized and able to do so.
So I would echo so many of things you said around just the streamlining of permitting and making things faster and easier. And just if I were to wave my magic wand from a customer perspective, I would love to see us really be able across industry be able to provide comprehensive solutions at the point of sale for customers, at the point of engagement. And maybe I'm going to throw this out to this afternoon's panel on DER and the role of DER, because I think the synthesis of demand-side management, energy efficiency, and PV and battery is something that we still could be better about ensuring that a customer experiences from the beginning to the end. And that's hard. There's a lot of people involved. So if I could wave my wand, that is what would happen every single time.
Yeah, I agree with everything so far. But if I were to chunk it in two buckets, we absolutely have to make available capital to be able to make those critical investments that we talked about. And one of the critical investments has to be to continue to accelerate, increase the pace of our current pace towards renewable energy and energy self-sufficiency to mitigate oil price volatility, which makes everything more affordable. If it's more affordable, then we'll have more money to invest in these critical infrastructure upgrades. So, for me, what we're really focusing on are the solutions the governor mentioned: reduce carbon, reduce cost, but do it in a way that attracts capital and accelerates the transition.
Thank you. Well, that wraps up our time. Please join me in thanking the panel as well as Governor Green for dropping in. Thank you.